Marcus Chen rolled his wheelchair through the doors of Murphy's Diner, the same way he had every Tuesday evening for the past 3 years. The small bell above the entrance chimed softly, announcing his arrival to the handful of customers scattered throughout the worn vinyl booths. At 52, Marcus had grown accustomed to the curious glances that followed him wherever he went. Some people stared at the wheelchair, others at the expensive watch on his wrist or the perfectly tailored suit he wore despite the casual setting. The waitress, Sarah, smiled warmly as she approached his usual corner booth. She had worked at Murphy's for over a decade and remembered when Marcus first started coming in. Back then he seemed angry at the world, barely making eye contact with anyone. Now 3 years later, he greeted her with genuine kindness and always left generous tips that helped Sarah support her 2 young children. "The usual, Mr. Chen?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. Marcus nodded, ordering his simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables. He appreciated the consistency of this place, the way nobody treated him differently or with pity. Here he was just another customer trying to enjoy a quiet dinner. As Marcus settled into his booth, he pulled out his tablet to review some documents. Few people in this small town knew that the quiet man in the wheelchair was actually the owner of Chen Industries, a technology company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had built his empire from nothing, working 18-hour days and making sacrifices that eventually cost him his marriage and relationship with his only daughter. The accident that put him in the wheelchair happened 2 years ago during a business trip. A drunk driver ran a red light, changing Marcus's life forever. The physical therapy was grueling, but the emotional recovery proved even harder. He had always been a proud, independent man, and suddenly he needed help with things he had taken for granted his entire life. Murphy's Diner became his refuge. It was the one place where he felt normal, where people knew him as Marcus rather than the disabled billionaire or the tragic news story that dominated headlines for weeks. The other customers treated him with simple human decency. Nothing more, nothing less. That was exactly what he needed. Tonight felt different somehow. Marcus noticed 3 young men in their 20s sitting at a nearby table, their voices getting louder as the evening progressed. They wore expensive sneakers and designer clothes, clearly from wealthy families in the area. Their conversation was filled with crude jokes and boastful stories about their latest expensive purchases. Marcus tried to focus on his work, but their voices carried across the small diner. Sarah brought his food with her usual smile, but Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. She had noticed the rowdy table too. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the 3 men. Marcus assured her he was fine, but he could sense tension building in the air. The 3 men had been drinking before arriving at the diner, and their behavior was becoming increasingly obnoxious. They made loud comments about other customers, laughed at inappropriate moments, and generally disrupted the peaceful atmosphere that Marcus cherished about this place. Other diners began glancing nervously in their direction, some even asking for their checks early. As Marcus tried to eat his meal, he couldn't help but overhear fragments of their conversation. They were complaining about having to do community service, apparently court-ordered after some previous incident. They spoke about it as if it were beneath them, as if rules didn't apply to people from their social class. Their entitlement was obvious and disturbing. One of them, a tall blonde young man who seemed to be their leader, noticed Marcus for the first time. He whispered something to his friends and all 3 turned to stare. Marcus felt their eyes on him but continued eating, hoping they would lose interest and leave him alone. He had learned that confrontation rarely ended well for someone in his position. The diner's atmosphere grew more uncomfortable as the evening progressed. Sarah moved between tables with increasing nervousness, while the cook occasionally peered out from the kitchen with a worried expression. The other customers ate quickly and quietly, clearly wanting to avoid any trouble. Marcus finished his meal and signaled for the check, planning to leave as soon as possible. But as Sarah approached his table with the bill, the 3 young men suddenly stood up from their booth. The tall blonde one nudged his friends and pointed directly at Marcus, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Whatever they were planning, Marcus knew it wasn't good. The blonde young man swaggered over to Marcus's table with his 2 friends following behind like loyal dogs. Their expensive clothes and cocky attitudes made it clear they came from privileged backgrounds, the type of young men who had never faced real consequences for their actions. The leader, who couldn't have been older than 25, looked down at Marcus with obvious contempt. Well, what do we have here? He said loudly, making sure everyone in the diner could hear. Look, guys, it's the wheelchair millionaire. I saw you on TV after your little car accident. Must be tough going from walking around in your fancy office to rolling around like a broken toy. Marcus looked up calmly, his years of business experience having taught him how to handle difficult people. I'm just trying to have dinner, he said quietly. Please leave me alone. But the three bullies had no intention of backing down. The second one, shorter with dark hair and a nasty grin, pulled out his phone and started recording. This is perfect, he laughed. Wait until our friends see this. The great Marcus Chen, reduced to eating at a cheap diner because he can't even get up the steps to a real restaurant. Sarah watched from behind the counter, her hands shaking as she reached for the phone to call the police. But the third bully, a heavy-set young man with red hair, noticed her movement. Don't even think about it, lady, he warned. We're not doing anything illegal. We're just having a conversation with our friend here. The leader leaned down closer to Marcus, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. I bet you miss the old days, don't you? When you could walk into any room and command respect? Now look at you stuck in that chair, having to look up at everyone like a child. How does it feel to be so helpless? Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he refused to give them the reaction they wanted. I've dealt with bigger bullies than you in boardrooms across the country, he said calmly. This doesn't impress me. This response only made them angrier. The blonde leader stood up straight and kicked Marcus's wheelchair, causing it to jolt backward slightly. Did you just threaten us, cripple? Do you know who our fathers are? We could buy this pathetic diner and turn it into a parking lot just for fun. The other customers in the diner sat frozen in their seats, too scared to intervene but clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. An elderly couple in the corner booth looked like they wanted to help, but the husband gently held his wife back, knowing that getting involved might make things worse. Come on, guys, the dark-haired one said, still filming. Let's see if he can do any tricks in that fancy wheelchair. Maybe he can spin around or do a wheelie for us. He reached out and grabbed one of the chair's handles, giving it a rough shake. Marcus gripped the wheels of his chair tightly, his knuckles turning white. In his business life, he had always been able to fight back with words, contracts, and financial power. But here, trapped in his wheelchair and outnumbered by three young men who clearly had no moral boundaries, he felt truly vulnerable for the first time since his accident. Stop it, Sarah finally found her voice, stepping out from behind the counter despite her fear. Leave him alone right now or I'm calling the police. The red-haired bully laughed. Go ahead and call them. My dad plays golf with half the police force in this town. They'll just tell you that boys will be boys. He turned back to Marcus with a cruel smile. Besides, we're not hurting anyone. We're just pointing out the obvious. This guy used to be somebody important and now he's just another disabled person taking up space. The leader decided to escalate things further. He grabbed Marcus's tablet from the table and held it high above his head. What's this? Still trying to run your business from a diner booth? That's pathetic. He pretended to drop it, laughing when Marcus instinctively reached up to catch it, only to have it pulled away at the last second. Please, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the humiliation. That has important work files on it. Just give it back. Oh, now he's begging, the dark-haired one said, still recording everything. The mighty Marcus Chen is begging 3 college students. This is going to get so many views online. The situation was spiraling out of control. The other customers looked on in horror, but no one seemed willing or able to step in. Sarah had managed to dial 911, but the dispatcher told her it would be at least 20 minutes before an officer could respond to what sounded like a verbal dispute. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, trying to center himself. He had survived the business world's worst sharks, recovered from a devastating accident, and rebuilt his life from the ground up. He wouldn't let 3 spoiled bullies break his spirit, no matter how helpless he felt in this moment. But the leader wasn't finished. He walked around behind Marcus's wheelchair and grabbed the handles. Let's see how well this thing steers, he said with a laugh, suddenly pushing the chair forward toward the wall. Marcus had no choice but to grip the wheels hard to stop himself from crashing, the rubber burning his palms as he fought against the bully's momentum. The entire diner fell silent except for the cruel laughter of the 3 young men. This wasn't just verbal harassment anymore. They had crossed a line into physical assault and everyone knew it. But still, no one moved to help. paralyzed by fear and uncertainty about what to do. The assault escalated quickly after that first push. The leader seemed emboldened by the lack of resistance from other customers and pushed Marcus's wheelchair again, this time harder, sending it spinning slightly to the right. Marcus had to grab the table edge to steady himself, his expensive suit jacket catching on the corner and tearing slightly. "Oops," the blonde bully said with fake concern. "Looks like your fancy clothes aren't so fancy anymore. Maybe you should shop somewhere more appropriate for your new lifestyle. I hear they have great wheelchair-friendly stores at the strip mall." The red-haired one joined in the physical harassment, walking around to face Marcus directly. He knocked over Marcus's water glass, letting the ice and liquid spill across the table and drip onto Marcus's lap. "Clumsy me," he said with a nasty grin. "But I guess you're used to having accidents, right?" Marcus felt cold water soaking through his pants, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Years of high-stakes business negotiations had taught him to keep his emotions in check, even when everything inside him wanted to fight back. But this was different from any boardroom confrontation he had ever faced. The dark-haired bully was still recording everything on his phone, narrating like he was filming a comedy show. "Today we're at Murphy's Diner, where we found a local celebrity having dinner by himself. Isn't that sad, folks? He used to have assistants and drivers, and now he can't even eat without making a mess." Sarah had moved closer, her face red with anger. "You need to stop this right now," she demanded. "This is assault and I've already called the police." But the three young men ignored her completely. They were enjoying their power over someone who couldn't fight back, someone who had once been more successful and wealthy than they could ever hope to be. It was like they were trying to tear down everything Marcus represented. The leader grabbed Marcus's tablet again, but this time he wasn't pretending to drop it. "Let's see what the great businessman is working on," he said, trying to unlock the screen. "Maybe we can find some insider trading secrets or something interesting." "That's private property," Marcus said firmly. "Give it back immediately." "Or what?" The bully laughed. "You'll stand up and take it from me?" His friends burst into laughter at their leader's cruel joke, while the other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The elderly couple in the corner booth finally stood up, the husband approaching cautiously. "Boys, that's enough," he said in a shaky but determined voice. "Leave this man alone and go home to your families." The red-haired bully turned on the old man immediately. "Mind your own business, Grandpa, before you end up in a wheelchair, too." The threat was clear, and the elderly man's wife pulled him back to their table, tears in her eyes. Marcus watched this exchange and felt something break inside him. It was one thing for these bullies to humiliate him, but threatening an innocent elderly man who had tried to help was crossing a line he couldn't tolerate. Despite his physical limitations, Marcus Chen was still a man who had built an empire through determination and strength. "You want to pick on someone?" Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "Then pick on me. Leave everyone else out of this." The leader seemed surprised by the change in Marcus's tone. For the first time since the harassment began, he looked slightly uncertain. "What did you say?" "I said leave everyone else alone," Marcus repeated, louder this time. "You want to humiliate someone? You want to prove how tough you are by attacking a disabled man? Fine, but don't threaten innocent people who have nothing to do with this." The dark-haired one stopped recording for a moment, sensing that something had shifted in the room. The other customers were now watching Marcus instead of looking away in embarrassment. Even Sarah seemed to stand straighter behind the counter. But the leader's moment of uncertainty passed quickly. "You think you're still in charge here?" he sneered. "You think you can give orders from that chair?" He walked around behind Marcus again and this time grabbed the wheelchair's handles with both hands, lifting the front wheels off the ground. Marcus felt himself tipping backward, completely at the mercy of someone who clearly had none. The sensation of helplessness was overwhelming, but instead of breaking his spirit, it fueled a determination he hadn't felt since before his accident. He might be physically trapped, but his mind was still sharp, still capable of finding ways to fight back. "Put me down," Marcus said calmly, but with an edge in his voice that made even the bullies pause. Instead, the leader tilted the chair back further, balancing Marcus precariously on the back wheels. "Say please," he demanded. "Say please, and maybe I'll put you down gently." The entire diner held its breath. This had gone far beyond harassment or even simple assault. The bully was now putting Marcus in real physical danger, and everyone knew it. The elderly couple clutched each other's hands. Sarah gripped the phone, so tightly her knuckles were white, and even the cook had come out of the kitchen to witness what was happening. Marcus looked straight ahead, refusing to beg. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. After everything these three young men had put him through, after all the humiliation and physical assault, Marcus Chen was still refusing to break. He might be trapped in a wheelchair, but his dignity remained intact. The leader's face turned red with anger at being defied. He tilted the chair back even further, and for a terrifying moment it seemed like he might actually let Marcus fall backward onto the hard diner floor. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone waited to see how far this cruelty would go. Just as the leader seemed ready to let Marcus fall, the front door of Murphy's diner chimed again. Everyone turned to see who was entering, but the three bullies were too focused on their victim to pay attention. The leader was still balancing Marcus's wheelchair on its back wheels, enjoying the power he held over someone who had once been untouchable. "I said say please," the bully repeated through gritted teeth, his arm starting to shake from holding the heavy wheelchair at such an awkward angle. "Just admit that you're nothing without your money and your company." Marcus remained silent, his jaw set in determination. Even facing the possibility of serious injury, he wouldn't give these young men the satisfaction of hearing him beg. His business instincts told him that showing weakness now would only make things worse. The red-haired bully was getting impatient. "Just drop him already," he said to his friend. "This is taking too long. Someone might actually call the cops who care." But the dark-haired one was still recording, fascinated by the psychological drama playing out in front of him. Wait, he said excitedly. "This is perfect. We're going to break the great Marcus Chen. This video is going to make us famous." The newcomer who had just entered moved quietly through the diner, but something about their presence seemed to change the atmosphere in the room. The other customers glanced toward the door with expressions of relief, though the three bullies were too absorbed in their cruelty to notice. Marcus felt his wheelchair tipping further back, the front wheels now completely off the ground. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, but still he refused to speak. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that this moment would define not just how others saw him, but how he saw himself for the rest of his life. "Last chance," the leader said, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of holding the chair. "Say please, and tell everyone here that you're just a pathetic cripple who doesn't deserve respect." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He thought about his daughter who hadn't spoken to him since the divorce. He thought about his ex-wife, who had left him not because of the accident but because of how cold and distant he had become in his pursuit of success. He thought about all the people he had stepped on during his climb to the top of the business world. Maybe he deserved this humiliation. Maybe this was karma finally catching up with him for all the times he had shown no mercy to competitors or employees. But even if that were true, he wouldn't break. Not here. Not like this. Not in front of people who were looking to him to show them how to face impossible odds with dignity. The leader's arms were really shaking now, and it was clear he couldn't hold the position much longer. Either he would have to put Marcus down, or he would have to follow through on his implied threat and let him fall. The moment of truth had arrived. "Fine," the bully snarled. "If you want to be a hero so badly, let's see how heroic you look on the floor." He began to loosen his grip, preparing to let Marcus crash backward onto the hard linoleum. The other customers gasped, and Sarah screamed from behind the counter. The elderly couple closed their eyes, unable to watch what was about to happen. But just as the leader's hand started to slip, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough." The voice was calm but carried an authority that made everyone in the diner freeze. It wasn't loud or threatening, but there was something about it that commanded instant attention. The three bullies finally turned to see who had spoken, and their confident expressions began to change. Standing near their table was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in a simple but well-tailored business suit. She wasn't particularly tall or physically intimidating, but she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of handling difficult situations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail and she wore glasses that gave her a professional appearance. "I said that's enough," she repeated, taking a step closer to the group. "Put him down. Now." The leader was so surprised by the interruption that he almost lost his grip on the wheelchair entirely. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, though some of the cockiness had gone out of his voice. "Put him down first," the woman said calmly. "Then we can talk." There was something about her presence that seemed to fill the entire diner. The other customers were watching her with expressions of hope, as if they somehow knew that help had finally arrived. Even Marcus, still trapped in his precarious position, felt a strange sense of relief at hearing her voice. The leader looked at his two friends, clearly uncertain about how to handle this new development. They had been in complete control of the situation just moments before, but now they seemed unsure of themselves. The woman wasn't physically threatening them or even raising her voice, but there was something about her that made them hesitate. "This is none of your business, lady," the red-haired bully said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "Just keep walking." The woman smiled slightly, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Actually," she said, "this is exactly my business." The blonde leader was still holding Marcus's wheelchair at a dangerous angle, but his attention was now focused entirely on the woman who had just confronted them. Something about her calm confidence was making him nervous, though he couldn't understand why. She wasn't physically intimidating, and she was clearly outnumbered 3-1. "Look, lady," he said, trying to regain his swagger. "This is between us and the cripple here. Why don't you go back to whatever boring office job you came from and mind your own business?" The woman reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge and identification. "Detective Rebecca Martinez, Metro Police Department," she said clearly. "And this became my business the moment you committed assault and battery against that man." The three bullies felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The dark-haired one immediately stopped recording on his phone, suddenly realizing that he had captured evidence of their crimes. The red-haired one took an unconscious step backward, while the leader's grip on Marcus's wheelchair began to loosen from shock. "You're a cop?" the leader stammered, his voice cracking slightly. 22 years on the force," Detective Martinez replied, moving closer with the measured steps of someone trained in crisis situations. "And in all that time, I've rarely seen such a clear-cut case of assault, battery, harassment, and possibly attempted bodily harm. Now put that man down immediately before I add more charges to the list." The leader was trapped between his pride and his fear. He had spent his entire life being told that his family's wealth and connections would protect him from consequences. But even he knew that assaulting someone in front of a police detective was a line he couldn't cross and expect to walk away unscathed. Reluctantly, he lowered Marcus's wheelchair back to the ground, all four wheels making contact with the floor again. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his hand still gripping the armrests tightly. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly to Detective Martinez, his voice hoarse with emotion. Detective Martinez nodded but kept her eyes fixed on the three young men. "Are you injured, sir?" she asked Marcus without looking away from the bullies. "No," Marcus replied. "Shaken up but not hurt." "Good," the detective said. "That might save these boys from facing felony charges." She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed a number. "This is Martinez. I need backup at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. 3 suspects in custody for assault and harassment." "Yes, I'll wait for transport." The red-haired bully found his voice first. "Wait, this is all just a misunderstanding," he said desperately. "We were just joking around. Nobody got hurt." Detective Martinez finally looked directly at him and her expression was cold as ice. "Joking around?" she repeated. "I watched you knock over his drink, push his wheelchair, threaten an elderly customer, and then hold this man in a position where he could have suffered serious injury from falling. That's not joking, son. That's criminal behavior." The dark-haired one tried a different approach. "Officer, you don't understand. This guy is Marcus Chen, the billionaire. He can afford any lawyer he wants. We're just college students. Our futures will be ruined if you arrest us." "Your futures should have been a concern before you decided to assault a disabled man," Detective Martinez replied, "and his financial status is irrelevant. The law protects everyone equally regardless of how much money they have. The leader made one last desperate attempt to avoid consequences. "My father knows the police chief personally," he said. "One phone call and this all goes away." Detective Martinez smiled grimly. "Your father can call whoever he wants. I've been arresting spoiled rich kids for over 2 decades, and I've never seen a connection strong enough to make assault charges disappear when there are this many witnesses." As if to emphasize her point, she looked around the diner at all the customers who had witnessed the entire incident. The elderly couple, Sarah the waitress, the cook who had emerged from the kitchen, and several other diners all nodded when she made eye contact with them. "Besides," Detective Martinez continued, "I'm sure Mr. Chen's lawyers are every bit as good as yours. The difference is he's the victim here, not the perpetrator." Marcus was slowly processing what had just happened. This detective had appeared out of nowhere, like an angel of justice, just when the situation had reached its most dangerous point. But there was something familiar about her that he couldn't quite place. "Excuse me, detective," Marcus said carefully. "Have we met before?" Rebecca Martinez turned to look at him properly for the first time since entering the diner. Her expression softened slightly as their eyes met. "Yes, Mr. Chen. We have met, though I'm not surprised you don't remember. It was about 5 years ago at the Children's Hospital fundraiser downtown." The memory came flooding back to Marcus. He had been the keynote speaker at a charity event, one of dozens he attended every year for tax benefits and public relations. But he did remember Detective Martinez now. She had been there in civilian clothes, not as part of his security detail or the event staff. "Your daughter," Marcus said suddenly. "She was a patient there." Detective Martinez nodded, a shadow of old pain crossing her face. "Emma. She was 8 years old and fighting leukemia. Your company's donation paid for a new children's wing, including the specialized equipment that helped save her life." The 3 bullies watched this exchange with growing confusion and dread. It was becoming clear that their victim and their captor had a connection that went deeper than just this evening's events. "She's doing well now," Detective Martinez continued. "She's 13, cancer-free for 3 years, and wants to be a doctor when she grows up. She says she wants to help sick kids the way the doctors at that hospital helped her." Marcus felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. In all his years of charitable giving, it had been rare for him to hear directly about how his donations had impacted individual lives. "I'm so glad," he said sincerely. Detective Martinez's radio crackled and she listened to a brief message before responding. "Copy that. Eat 5 minutes." She looked back at the 3 young men who were still standing awkwardly near Marcus's table. "Gentlemen, my colleagues will be here shortly to take you in for booking. I suggest you use the next few minutes to think about how you want to explain your behavior to your parents, your lawyers, and eventually a judge." The next few minutes passed in tense silence as everyone in Murphy's diner waited for the police backup to arrive. The 3 bullies had completely lost their arrogant swagger and now looked like what they really were, scared young men who had finally gone too far. The dark-haired one kept glancing at his phone, probably wondering if he should delete the video he had recorded, while the red-haired bully stared at the floor in shame. Detective Martinez used the time to take statements from the witnesses. The elderly couple spoke in shaky but determined voices about what they had seen. Sarah the waitress gave a detailed account of the entire incident, from the moment the 3 men had started harassing Marcus until Detective Martinez arrived. Even the cook emerged from the kitchen to confirm that he had witnessed the assault. "Mr. Chen," Detective Martinez said, approaching his table with a small notebook. "I'll need your statement as well, but I understand if you'd prefer to give it at the station tomorrow. Tonight has been traumatic enough." Marcus straightened in his wheelchair, his business instincts taking over despite everything that had happened. "No, I'd like to give it now while everything is fresh in my memory. These young men need to face consequences for their actions." As Marcus recounted the evening's events in clear, precise language, the 3 bullies realized that their victim wasn't going to make this easy for them. There would be no quiet settlement, no behind-the-scenes deal to make the charges disappear. Marcus Chen might be in a wheelchair, but he was still a man who commanded respect and knew how to fight for justice. The sound of sirens grew louder as 2 police cars pulled up outside the diner. Detective Martinez's colleagues entered with professional efficiency, taking control of the 3 suspects. The blonde leader made one final attempt to assert his privilege, demanding to call his lawyer immediately, but was informed that he could make his phone call from the station after he was processed. As the three young men were led away in handcuffs, the atmosphere in Murphy's diner began to return to normal. The other customers slowly resumed their conversations, though many kept glancing at Marcus with expressions of newfound respect. He had faced a terrible situation with dignity and courage, refusing to break even when his safety was threatened. Sarah brought Marcus a fresh glass of water and quietly told him that his meal was on the house. "You handled that better than anyone should have to," she said warmly. "I'm sorry it happened in our restaurant." "It's not your fault," Marcus replied. "And it's certainly not this restaurant's fault. I'll still be here next Tuesday, same as always." Detective Martinez finished her paperwork and approached Marcus's table one final time. "Mr. Chen, I want you to know that those three will face serious charges: assault and battery, harassment, intimidation, and possibly hate crime enhancement since they targeted you specifically because of your disability." "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "They'll be processed tonight, arraigned tomorrow morning. Given their behavior and the strength of the evidence, I expect the district attorney will push for significant penalties. Their wealthy families might be able to afford expensive lawyers, but they can't change the facts of what happened here tonight." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Detective Martinez, I want to thank you not just for tonight but for what you do every day. I've spent most of my career focused on profit margins and market shares, but people like you are out here actually making the world a better place." Rebecca Martinez smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown all evening. "Mr. Chen, 5 years ago your generosity helped save my daughter's life. Tonight I was able to help protect yours. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes. Good deeds come back to us when we need them most." As Detective Martinez prepared to leave, Marcus called after her. "Detective, would you be willing to bring Emma by my office sometime? I'd love to meet the young lady who wants to be a doctor. Chen Industries has several scholarship programs for students interested in STEM fields and medicine." "She would love that," Detective Martinez replied. "And Mr. Chen? What you did tonight, refusing to break under pressure, refusing to let them destroy your dignity, that took real courage. Don't let anyone tell you that being in a wheelchair makes you weak. What I saw here tonight was one of the strongest people I've ever met." After the detective left, Marcus sat alone at his table for a few more minutes, processing everything that had happened. The evening had started as just another quiet Tuesday dinner, but it had become something much more significant. He had been tested in a way he never expected, and had discovered reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. The elderly couple stopped by his table before leaving. "Young man," the husband said, "we're sorry we couldn't do more to help when those bullies were bothering you." "You tried," Marcus replied. "That took courage, and I appreciate it more than you know." As Marcus finally prepared to leave Murphy's diner, he reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought Detective Martinez into his life twice now. 5 years ago, his charitable donation had been just another tax-deductible business expense. Tonight, it had literally saved him from serious harm, but more than that, tonight had taught him something important about himself. His accident had taken away his ability to walk, but it hadn't taken away his strength, his dignity, or his capacity to inspire others. The way the other customers had looked at him after he refused to break under pressure told him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up.